We're going to take a different approach than we did last time with week 4, and this time we're going to talk a little bit more about activity and caloric balance and the energy balance system. Welcome to week 8. As you may remember from week 4, a number of things we did in review of some of the readings that you've been involved with. Took a look at nutrition and some of those basic principles many of us now are very familiar with. But through the course of our time together, we've also mentioned that nutrition doesn't stand alone, but can only be enhanced when it's used appropriately and it's understood appropriately in the context of the energy balance system. So here what I've included for your review and just for your general education. And again, this is not associated with a gradable assignment, but just something available to you to review what those principles of fitness might look like in a very general sense, and some more work and some more discussion around the energy balance system and caloric balance and how that fits nicely together in parallel with nutrition. So let's get started. Let's take a look at the role of water both from an intake and an output standpoint. I like this as a representation that tells us that balance is important, as we all know. And this contributes nicely to the overall metabolic balance and the energy balance that we try to strive for on a day-to-day basis, and how important a role water plays here. So that on the left, when we look at water intake in an example of 10 cups, that 8 of those may come from those amounts of water we consume from the faucet or from a bottle or other fluids, but that there are others that are contained in food as well as produced by the metabolic processes. And then on the right, with water output, we know that skin perspiration and lung respiration and even that like urine output contribute to a great deal of the output. So when we match those up again in a larger process of overall balance, how important a role does water play? And we can see here it contributes a great deal to that. Here we have a list of just a very few of the food items that contain the percents of water is listed here. So while we look back at the previous slide, we know that there are certain foods and the metabolic processes and even the glasses of water we consume, that here in food, as an example, the constituency is according. And when we look at tomatoes and lettuce and apples and oranges and even the beverages we drink, of course, water is present. But then when we look down the list, it's fewer examples of that. So again, as we look at the water we may take through glasses of water, our normal consumption during the day through fluids, or even what the metabolic processes provide, that there are certain foods that can give us ample indication of that as well. And interesting to note, of course, that when we're looking at the complex carbohydrate, that's a really good source for the fluids that we need. Here we have a nice opportunity to look at a nice representation when we're looking at energy balance. And if we look at these three examples in the top here with respect to energy balance and equilibrium, we have someone here who's eating a 3,000 kilocalorie meal, and the output of energy is the same. So what we see on the right, of course, is no change, which is really optimal once we're able to find that for ourselves in our lives. The other things we often see, though, is the positive energy balance, and this is something probably we see more often these days as examples of people putting on those extra pounds here and there. Here's an example of someone who's eating a 4,000 calorie meal, but only expending 2,000. So really simple math tells us that with the increase of calories based on what the intake is, less or with lesser output, that positive energy balance or calories in certainly outweighs what those calories are in expenditure. And then finally, with the negative energy balance, here we see somebody who is eating a 2,000 kilocalorie meal, which is really quite low, expending quite a bit. And then when we see a negative energy balance, we certainly see that the calories out far exceed those that are taken in, and we would see a decrease in weight. So in a real simplification of this, we can see where calories count. So you count calories. And that's one of the things that the simplification many people are following today when they're looking at food labels. And they're finding a great deal of success when looking at those numbers of simply counting calories and the kinds of benefits and some of the accomplishments that they can achieve from that. Here's a good example of looking at some of the macronutrients. Let's look on the left for a moment with the protein, carbohydrate, fat, and alcohol. When we look at this nice little balance, we can see the intake of those macronutrients would be the energy in. And then when we're looking on the other side to it, we know that the components of output can be divided into at least 4 major general areas. That would be of the energy that is expended just for basic basal metabolism, the processes of the body at rest, and all the metabolic processes that take place that require those energy sources. So that's a substantial amount of that energy that's going to be asked of us on a day-to-day basis. Now, if you look at the thermal or thermic effect of food, that would require what kind of energy would, once we begin to ingest food, what about the whole process of absorption and digestion and elimination, and the kind of energy that the gastrointestinal system requires of it? It's quite much. And then, of course, we add physical activity to this. So what does our physical activity look like on a day-to-day basis? Are we just generally sort of zero-level couch potatoes in a sense? Are we people that do minimal amount of activity going to and from work? Or do we enhance that through some exercise on the other end? And then thermogenesis simply is what kind of energy do we expend just to maintain the heat of the body as warm-blooded animals? As an example, shivering would be one such activity that would be a thermogenic activity, so to speak. Add those together and we see here that there can be nice balance when all those are considered in parallel with each other. So where do we go to look at numbers of calories to consume? Here's a table now that does real kind of a general look at what the calories to consume would be for different ages, whether that's female or male. And starting as low as 1,200 for sedentary, very young children, both males and females, all the way up to, for the later years, is 51 plus, somewhere between 1,600 to 2,000 for the sedentary individual. So where do we find that happy medium so that we can, again, establish that equilibrium and that appropriate energy balance? It's not so simple to say this, but those ranges are fairly accurate. We have other measurements and we have other sort of calculations that can tell us much more about that, which also include height and even in many cases include somatotyping, so that we can look at body types and sizes and know that that can carry certain kinds of concerns and calculations when it comes to the calories that would be appropriate for that individual. So maybe this helps to sort of glance against to see where you might fit in. We are looking for those kinds of norms that also take us into looking at what would my weight in pounds be in terms of healthy, what would overweight look like, or even those in the obesity categories. And here's one table that tells us by height what that might look like. Now, we all know with enough reading and enough consideration being in the healthcare profession that what we're looking at here is including much more. That to simply put a weight table out there and say, here's your height and here's your healthy weight, these just give us very, very general norms to consider. But when we're looking at more important matters like cardiovascular risk, it's now the time to begin to look at things like BMI and to include that as part of the calculation. What about hip to waist ratios? What can that tell us? That can tell us quite a bit, because now we're beginning to see a lot of emphasis being placed again around waist circumference as an indication for cardiovascular risk. And even just simply waist circumference itself. Lots of studies within the last 10 years are looking at BMI and waist circumference and waist to hip ratios in comparison. And what we're finding is, in as much as the others do declare and can tell us a lot about risk, that being BMI and waist to hip ratios, that really it's waist circumference that in some studies have trumped the others and have told us that that risk of cardiovascular insult can be measured oftentimes in what that waist circumference looks like. So there's a lot of energy and a lot of time being spent in research and in practice to see, does it really play out practically for most people? And I think we're going to have a chance either later in this section or this slide presentation or the third to talk about that even a little bit more. I think it's worth mentioning that we do also look at the different body types when looking at body composition, and that while we may look at age and gender and height as an example, looking at the body composition will be important as well. I've sort of simplified here the idea that when we're looking at the overweight condition, it's been commonly understood that men are thought to have what is called an apple shape, and then women having a pear shape. But what's more importantly in this representation and depiction here is the waist circumference here, and we see with this gentleman here 44 inches in waist, and then for a woman 32. But if we look at our discussions that's becoming better known now over these last 15 or 20 years, that waist circumference tells us an awful lot about cardiovascular risk. And so that while we may look at an apple shape or a pear shape and wonder whether that's something that presents this kind of difficulty, we know that 44 inches, at least in most terms, will tell us that that's a waist circumference that exceeds by at least 4 inches what is today being held as a standard for males, indicating not only obesity but also, or stages of obesity, but also that risk for cardiovascular risk as well. And then for a woman, 32 inches is 3 inches below what is today acceptable as 35 inches. So again, hopefully this is something that can, in a way, graphically describe not only what we would look at in terms of body type and what a body type might indicate, but also cardiovascular risk. Okay, so then let's look at some of the training principles that are involved when we're looking at that energy expenditure portion of this important equation of energy in and energy out. According to the American College of Sports Medicine, when we're looking at training principles, they sort of hang their hat on some core concepts: flexibility, muscle fitness, which would include muscle endurance and muscle strength, cardiorespiratory fitness or aerobic activity, which would equate to, and of course then whether or not that leads to an important and healthy body composition. So I think the sum total of all those, including a very, very healthy nutritional approach, will give us the body composition we're looking for. So when we look at our metabolics again, or our internals, and we see what those reflect, let's say with our lipids or our blood pressure or others, that this is mixed for a sound approach. So when we put these exercise or fitness and activity programs together, we certainly always want to be mindful of some of the American College of Sports Medicine parameters that are stated forth, again, along with a fine and healthy nutritional program. Let's take a look at some of the great benefits that exercise and fitness program can give us. There are many here, and again, many that are common or common knowledge to most, but I think we can probably indicate that, well, while we know that cardiovascular fitness is going to be an important component of this, and certainly things that some people think less of, or spend a lesser time thinking about, would be in improving immunology, let's say. And again, like we mentioned before with the American College of Sports Medicine, what about the increase in flexibility and balance, preventing falls, let's say, or muscle pulls that restrict activity otherwise? What about the components of strengthening bone, let's say, eliminating or at least decreasing the potential for osteoporosis, whether that's for men and women as we age later in life, improving sleep, let's say. I think all of these, when we look at it, do play an important role. And we know, as an example, if it's improving blood glucose regulation, as an example, that the exercise program will be a very important component for those that have their type 2 diabetes and are looking to regulate blood glucose, maybe lose a little bit of weight, and of course correct for those situations or risk of cardiovascular events that loom altogether too regularly in that situation. The workout contains three different sections to it, or three different stages, and that would be the warm-up to start, and the workout itself, and then of course the cool down. So let's take just a moment to look at the warm-up as an example. How many times have we seen people just simply get out of their car or off their bicycle or through the door and don't do any warm-up at all? but that we know the importance of that, particularly when it talks about preparing the body for metabolic activity or an improved metabolic process and rate, and that it's important to, in a sense, get those muscles prepared, get that blood flow to the deeper tissue of the muscle, so that as it begins to be stimulated through exercise, we're doing two things really, that we're preparing the muscle to receive the oxygen required and the nutrients, and by the same token, as we'll see later in cool down, just the reverse, let's say. But that muscles that are not stimulated, or not warmed up, so to speak, cannot stretch appropriately or fully. And so what are we doing there in a sense in the very early portion of the fitness exercise or the workout, putting ourselves at risk for pulling a muscle, let's say. So let's take that 10 minutes out, let's say, to make sure that we're warming up appropriately and know that there's a great many metabolic and anatomical and physiological effects and benefits from it that would far exceed any situation where we're to begin our workout without stretching or without warming up at all. So after the warm-up period, then of course the exercise bout takes place. And here at the bottom, get fit to play sports, don't play sports to get fit. How many times do we see in that important 30 to 50-year-old age range individuals out there putting back on the soccer outfit or the volleyball or the basketball or the track, and getting ready to get back out there to play that softball game again, and they're saying, well, as long as I'm going to get in shape, I might as well enjoy doing it, so I might as well do it through the enjoyment of the activity that I choose, like the sport. But there isn't more of a case where we see individuals coming up with strains or breaks or even worse. And that may have been an indication, when we know it's an indication for the most part, that they're totally unfit to begin, but that they could have enjoyed the sport or the re-entry into the sport more had they gotten themselves into fitness even before starting. So we know that the exercise bout here, the goal of it is not only to improve those ACSM guidelines that we've talked about already, but also to enjoy it. And we can't enjoy it if we're laid up, so to speak, or we have that cast around our knee or ankle, because what we've done is tried to push ourselves too quickly. Whether you're doing cardiorespiratory fitness or you're doing maybe a hybrid version of it, or we're doing maybe just strength training, we have to be all too aware of what our condition is and what our potential is and what our limitations are, let's say, so that when we begin the exercise bout, we're not putting ourselves at jeopardy for injury again or worse. So now you've ended your exercise bout and you've had a good workout. And what we see again all too often is throw the coat on and throw the shoes back on, grab the car keys and jump back in the car and go home, as opposed to thinking about maybe spending another 10 minutes or so on a cool down, where we take our metabolic rate and we take our respiratory rate and the heart rate back down to normal levels. It's a much safer way to approach it. We know it's at that time that we're looking at trying to continue to eliminate the carbon dioxide that has been produced through the active exercise, along with the lactic acid, let's say. And that we know hours after the bout, if we've cooled down appropriately, we can more efficiently remove those products of exercise and activity than we might had we just stopped altogether or very quickly. So let's think again as we cool down the 3 steps and the 3 stages to the workout, and appropriately warming up for 10 minutes and find our way then into an exercise bout that let's say we hope would last 20 minutes to, let's say, 40 minutes. If you've been working out, maybe you can push that to 60, let's say. And then at the end of that time, we're able to take really, I think, a very healthy and a very productive exercise time and follow that with a cool down of around 10 minutes. So what are we talking about? Potentially working out, including cool down and warm up, maybe of an hour, 60 minutes or so. And all during that time, what we're doing is checking heart rate to make sure we're within, we would hope, that 50 to 85% of target heart rate, but that if we're just starting out and we're just beginning to exercise after a long period of being sedentary, we don't want to push ourselves maybe to 50% at this point. Maybe we want to start at around 20% of target heart rate and then maybe over a 6-week period graduate towards 50%. So let's keep it slow as we go, and we think you can benefit, especially again for those who haven't been exercising in a while. That would be a great place to start, and hopefully a great place to finish. As we take a look here now at a better representation in a chart, looking at the types of activities that we're going to want to make sure that we engage in. So look across the top and we see aerobic, strength training, or anaerobic, and of course incorporating stretching there. And then along the left-hand column you can see some examples of recommended duration, frequency, intensity, and so on, such that what we've developed for ourselves is a nice, well-rounded routine of types of exercises that do a couple of things. Tax the cardiorespiratory system, really important. Develop that kind of strength or that stress we place on muscles and bone so as to intensify the response that's capable of enduring when there are risks of injury, let's say. And then, of course, stretching, which from a joint or articular standpoint allows us the flexibility to move beyond the range of motion again, whether that's through performance or something that causes us to do that in an unnatural way. We also know that combining aerobic and anaerobic programs will benefit us the best when considering what is available for energy to be expended, so that from a standpoint of taking some of those worrisome calories that either we're consuming or those calories stored as energy we wish to burn, that would be an appropriate way to go. But let's not avoid one for the other necessarily, but try to incorporate both whenever possible into that weekly routine. So what's all the buzz about concerning cardiorespiratory fitness, aerobic fitness, so to speak? We know that, of course, that the heart and the lungs being so vital to survival and to just overall health, this is going to be the kind of exercise that's going to, the intensity of which is going to require us to probably go at least 20 minutes to reach that 20-minute mark at the very minimum. And that if we can get somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes at a workout regimen, or even one that sometimes reaches 1 hour, we're also going to have to measure that according to the way in which we look at heart rate. So that as we look at target heart rate or a max heart rate of, let's say, 50% of max heart rate up to 85%, those are those sort of magic numbers that we want to be working with, so that we're able to achieve the kind of intensity that stresses the heart and stresses the lung in such a way that it's beneficial from a long-term standpoint. We know in aerobic endurance, as an example, that oxygen is carried to the tissues and to the heart, and that what we're trying to do then in a beneficial way and maximize the ability of the tissues and organs to dispose of the carbon dioxide and the lactic acid and other wastes over that period during which we're exercising. We also seem to know that aerobic exercise will, in a very real way, when intensity is reached somewhere between that 50 to 85% of target heart rate for a period of around, let's say again, a minimum of 20, hopefully no less than 30 minutes, that we can begin to deliver enough oxygen to the tissues so that at a cellular level we can unlock the energy that's stored as fat. And we know that the power of fat to carry energy is great, but also the ability of the tissue to unlock it can even be more problematic, so that if we're just purely involved in anaerobic activities, which are less than 20 minutes, or many cases just less than 15, and just use strength as a modicum for doing that, that we're simply just using circulating or present glucose as an energy source. But that as we get further along into the exercise regimen, again at the intensities I've described, gives us a much better chance to begin to tap into those fat stores. Here we can see again, as I've just mentioned before, that if we're looking at somewhere between 30 to 5 days per week, that 20 to 60 minute session of exercise, and at the heart rate or the target heart rate at that percent of heart rate reserve, we can go a long way to, again, maximizing really three important things, and that would be to strengthen heart and lungs, which would be absolutely essential and vital. The ability to unlock fat as a source of energy for that workout time. That those magic numbers, so to speak, will do that to the best of its ability. And then finally, when we start looking at things like weight management, we know that this gives us and also an important way in order to maximize the effort we give to losing those few pounds on occasions that we need to do. And that when we're measuring intensity, oftentimes we can do that through either watching our target heart rate, if we take our pulse during the course of that exercise period and see if we're hitting that target zone. But also that we can look at talk tests and perceived exertion charts, which would at times be used in stress tests, let's say, or the talk test, which can be used among people walking together around the park or in a mall, and note that as long as they can carry on a conversation without too much difficulty, that they're probably working at a level that's right for them. That if they can't, and they become too breathless, that's usually a pretty good sign to sort of settle down. So those, again, are some of the numbers that we would want to try to reach for when thinking about how that would work. And so here we have the calculation of the target heart rate that can be simply done by hand, and this just is a visualization of what that little calculation might look like. We would start with the estimating your max heart rate at 220 minus the age, and then talk about taking your resting heart rate, and then what we can do from there is calculate what was called the heart rate reserve. And once we get your heart rate reserve, then we can calculate that by taking some level of your target heart rate, let's say anywhere between 50 and 85%. Take that, multiply your heart rate reserve by that number, add back the resting heart rate, and we would get what then you would calculate as a target heart rate at that given percent. Also remember what 50 to 85 represents, and that is the maximum amount of intensity that, when worked out, will give you the best chance to test the lungs and the heart in an appropriate way, burn calories, and also maintain and control weight when the loss of a few pounds is required. So just keep that in mind. You can also go online and see a number of different examples that free calculations can provide to do as well. Then here we have, with respect to the training principles around strength and endurance, again, some of the key elements to the American College of Sports Medicine, and what they suggest around a way to approach whether that is a strength program or an endurance program. What's missing here is some suggestion around how to improve power, but we'll stay with strength and endurance now because that seems to be most of what the general public is looking for. Many of us are familiar with the high resistance, somewhere between that 70 to 90% of a 1 rep maximum, with a low number of reps per set, and that might be somewhere anywhere between, let's say, 7 to 10 reps within that simple set. Within endurance, which isn't building bulk but just really kind of maintaining strength and some definition, at lower resistance that can be as low as 50 to 70%, or 60 to 80%, with a high number of reps, sometimes between 15 to 25. So depending on what your purpose is for that kind of improvement in musculoskeletal strength or endurance, will pretty much determine which of. And here we'll take a look at some of the muscle groups to target: shoulders, hips, upper back, hamstring, among others. As you'll notice from this list, these are the major muscle groups, including the core. So that if you want to do something that's safe and effective in terms of overall strength, or again endurance, preparation, and maintenance and improvement, these would be the muscles to choose. If you're more concerned about sports-specific activities, then clearly there might be situations where smaller muscle groups would be the ones to target. But usually what we see in general health, in the general health matters, is that people are interested in choosing those kinds of things that just give them better balance, so to speak. This is going to prevent the kinds of problems you might see with muscle strains in general activity, let's say. But that even something that might create a problem at work if you're doing some heavy lifting. So to do the major muscle groups, you're well on your way to creating the kind of bisymmetry that's required when thinking about the muscle groups to target. Hopefully this helps. And finally, we have a list of activities, and there are many listed here, including the kinds of calories that you would be burning per hour and the total over that 1 hour period. And I think at first glance you can see there are certain kinds of activities that give you a pretty good workout and pretty good idea of the kind of expenditure that kind of activity would require. So by no means is this list complete. In fact, there are numbers of different internet kinds of activities, different kinds of calculators, let's say, or even those databases that give us the idea that just about anything anybody can choose for exercise can be counted on for the calories that they may burn. And again, that's whether we see it in a per kilogram per hour basis or one that we would see over the course of a specific period of time. So with the help of those kind of digital and electronic calculators now that can be found for free just about anywhere, we have a really good idea on how to expend the kind of energy that's required. And we've mentioned this before in the past that when we're looking at calorie and calorie equivalency in terms of energy expenditure, you'd probably want to be looking somewhere on average between 250 to 500 calories for a workout, which would be somewhere around 30 to 45 minutes for the average person. Those are real basic averages to consider. But if you're trying to lose again and shed a few extra pounds here and there, if you can somehow manage to burn off 500 calories per day and also then take in less calories, let's say up to 500 per day for 7,000 per week, then we're clearly at that area where we're maybe able to shed those 2 pounds on average. So these kinds of charts and these kinds of calculations can really help. That concludes this presentation for this week 8, and hopefully you've been able to take something away, something you can use, put in the hip pocket, and something that you can share with others. We'll be back again later in this course with one during week 12 that looks more closely at this problem we call the cardiometabolic disease or the metabolic syndrome. Thanks again.